All right, welcome to Ancapistani Lounge. Um, I'm here with a, a returning guest, Nate the Voluntarist, and a special guest, Ashley. Do you want
Hello.
to tell us? Oh, yeah. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and um, why you've agreed to come?
Um, where do you start? The last couple years, I've had a pretty big battle against the system, against certain groups of individuals. Um, I did a constitutional question I put before the federal court regarding certain practices within the government that was completely ignored. I do a lot of advocacy and I fight for the rights of children, pertaining specifically around abuse cases. So I'm hoping to touch on some of the mechanisms that our system and people and abusers use to cover up their crimes and to traumatize people.
Yeah, right on. I'm looking forward to hearing that too. How did just one more question before we begin? Um, how How did you get it first get involved? Like, what happened? A little briefing on that for everyone.
Absolutely. My children were abused. I got involved with an individual who turned out to be a pedophile who had a very old bloodline and was connected to a certain network in a very small community, and into things that I wasn't aware were systemic in the world today. And
Oh my gosh.
I started fighting to get my children safe. And that's when the wake up call kind of came. And that's how I've gotten involved in advocacy and working with many different people in very similar situations, and kind of understanding the history of the world and our court systems and how corrupt they are and how they operate. It's really been quite the learning curve for sure.
Sounds like you've looked into quite a lot.
I had to. I didn't really have much of a choice when you're in that type of situation, as a mother and you have very young children, and it's bad. It's really bad, and there's
Yeah.
not a lot of help out there. Especially in my particular case, I was dealing with a family of full-on psychopaths who were connected.
Oh my
So I
gosh.
had to figure it out, or I was going to die. The amount of triangulation, harassment, it was
Ugh.
absolutely insane. It went so far to start hitting on spiritual levels where I had to get spiritual advisors to help me through, because it really was that drastic.
Hmm. My gosh. Nate, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a good guest. Zachary, one more good friend of ours, Zachary Colley. He might join in a little later. We'll see. Just
Awesome.
to let you know. Yeah, he's pretty cool. Um, yeah, so I managed to watch your video again about the playbook of what the narcissists in the political system tend to do to project and slander and put down and shut down concerned parents.
Absolutely. And silence victims and the children as well. Like anyone talking out about this, and the children are put through systemic abuse where they're taught from a very young age that you do not have a voice, and if you try to use it you will be punished for it. And the family courts do that, the child protection agencies do that. It's literal legalized brainwashing through our government systems. Like we talk about things like MK Ultra and how they had these programs running through, like, say, Montreal, Dr. Cameron, and that was back, I believe, in the 60s or 70s, where the CIA was funding an MK Ultra program where they were testing on patients in a medical or a mental institution. And that's all documented. But this is the exact same type of trauma programming but it's legalized and it's taking place in our government systems.
Yeah, that's crazy. MK Ultra, Monarch, mind control, all
It,
that.
it's so widespread. We're living in such a dystopian universe where our children are being raised to be silent, to go along with the system for fear of being punished. And this narcissistic approach of being the food, or the victim staying the victim and always being the victim and not being able to find a way out, like that, it's supported in the police structures, it's supported in the court structures, it's supported in the child protection agencies. Like, those people who operate on that level will be fine. Like, it's like the basic understanding for an affidavit in court, right? You write an affidavit and you're swearing on a Bible. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and you write this affidavit, and it's an affidavit of truth. Therefore, it's assumed by the court that you're telling the truth. So you have individuals in there who are moral, they're accountable, that do that. And then you have the narcissist or the psychopath, and they have no problem lying on court documents. They have no problem, surrounding themselves with other individuals who will support them in their lies or make their own lies for them. And that information is accepted in the courts. Like, the actual structure of that court is to ensure that liars do get free.
Yeah, it's nothing at all like how it is shown on film.
Or in the TV, exactly. And
Yeah.
we have, as a society, and that's something, if you ever find yourself in one of these situations, that's one of the first wake-up calls, is, you start seeing the therapists, or you start going to the advocates, or you start going to the doctors and explaining your situation, and people have never experienced anything like this assume that the system works the way they were told it works. So when you say you're being threatened by police, or that people aren't reviewing evidence, or things are going on, they automatically assume you're crazy, because that couldn't possibly be happening. They don't look at the evidence, they just go off of their previously held belief.
Yeah, that's how cognitive dissonance works.
Exactly. And the scary part is these abusers, especially the more heinous ones, the ones running the child trafficking networks, the ones, pedophiles abusing children, the ones making the pornography, and that, their whole life relies on the fact that there are good people out there who would never believe that this is happening. And that was something I witnessed when I was trying to get help and being forced through this court system. And how much these individuals rely, and that's something you hear a lot from people, women in abusive situations. It's something the partner says, no one will ever believe you. And it's true. It's true. When you are going through that kind of systematic abuse, especially with one of these narcissists who appear to be completely different people in public, who have a band of individuals around them, especially in these centers where you have very powerful people in high positions of power. The other individuals in the community assume that because they've made it to that position of power, well, then they must be accountable. They must be moral individuals. Well, it's the police chief. He must be a good guy. So you have all of these individuals who are getting abused and used in these systems trying to speak out. And the entire community rallies to the abuser's side to continue to torment and abuse the victim even more so. And all that does is teach the people in those situations to be quiet and to go away.
Yeah, that's I was just thinking it's like major Stockholm syndrome.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And a lot of individuals, exactly with the Stockholm syndrome, they rely on that, especially in these circles with the child pornography and pedophilia, when they're connected to, say, Masons and old bloodlines, where these things have been going on for thousands of years within these families. That is how, when they start the abuse at the young age, that is to set up the Stockholm syndrome. That is to set up the air of psychopathy and just psychology within that child, so they believe that this is normal, or they can't speak out about it, or like they know exactly what they're doing in order to have facilitated a system where so few people know about it unless you're involved in those circles. And if you're involved in those circles and you try to get out of it, the chances of people believing you are very, very rare. It's slim possibilities. It's getting better with the amount of information that's coming out today. But even today, and I've been talking about this for a couple years now, and years ago, no one would believe the gravity. Now some people are starting to, but still daily, I speak to individuals that don't want to believe how widespread this is. They still want to have this idea, well, it's just, Washington, D.C., or it's just this group of royals, or it's just this group. They don't understand that these networks, sure, there are centers where they're more prolific than others. But almost in every town where you're having positions of power, there's some sort of blackmail network set up so that they continue operating their businesses in these fashions, in these ways. It's so much more widespread than we want to believe.
Yeah, it's spread across the world, I believe.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's not just the U.S. It's pretty much spread throughout the whole country. I remember reading about how horrible it is in Bangladesh with the the child abuse brothels.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot more out in the open when you get into like the Haiti, or the, you know what I mean, or even like you hear about Afghanistan and I forget what it was called, Baka boys, where it's almost customary there for these, certain generals and that to have 12 to 14-year-old boys that dress up like girls that they, facilitate the use of while they're away from home. And it's just a normal thing. It's almost cultural in some of these places. And it's disgusting. You go to India and there's, I forget what the exact temple is, but there's a temple dedicated to a certain goddess where they were prostitutes. That was their job. And now it's illegal, but it's still going on. And these girls get dedicated to this temple at 11 years old. As soon as they have their first period, they're going to live at the temple, and so these are legalized forms or illegal forms that are taking place. But when we get into like the first worlds, and you're looking at like the Australia and the UK and Canada and the United States, now we're looking at where they've developed very intricate systems in order to facilitate this. So we're looking at child protection agencies.
More like child kidnapping agency.
Exactly. These people get thousands of dollars for these children monthly. So it's an internal money laundering type system where they're getting government bursaries to take care of children. Those children are not being given the services that they claim on paper that they're being received. So there's all this money sitting there. And on top of it, they're literally adopting them out to pedophiles and pedophile rings, where they're either trafficking them or making child pornography or worse. It's something like 88% of the children of women being trafficked in the United States came out of child protection. That's insane. You can't tell me that it's a once-off, and there's reports here in Canada. I was working with this advocacy woman where these children would be put into group homes and things like that. And as soon as they would age out, they'd be kicked out on the streets. They wouldn't provide them their identification. They wouldn't provide them any system allowance. They wouldn't provide them any shelter to go to. They were just literally kicked out on the streets with nowhere to go. And this is who we're putting in charge of protecting our children? It's insane. It's a money-making operation. That's all it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's really insane and disgusting. And
it's really bad, and that's why I'm
worse than anyone could imagine.
Exactly. Like, I don't know, you guys are in the States, but I don't know if you heard about like the residential schools, or, and I think there were incidences of things like this in the States where there were, like, say, Christian, Catholic churches where they took on these, native Aboriginals. And what was going on in these native schools, which has now come out publicly, the Canadian government just settled $800 million to natives for the 60s scoop, where they went and they literally kidnapped all of these native children, put them in these schools. And there's reports where things like tuberculosis were going around, and they would force sick children into rooms with healthy children and force them to share spoons and things like that, so they would all get sick, just to kill as many of them as possible. That's documented in the 60s. So now, it wasn't that long ago. So now here we are sitting here, what, 50 years later, 60 years later, going, oh, well, that's not us anymore. Well, those residential schools, although they closed, they turned into group homes and foster homes, where now it's something like 60 or 70% of children in care are on some sort of pharmaceutical drug. So they're taking these children, drugging them out of their minds, and eventually these, if they survive, these are the ones to go on to be the prostitutes on the street, or the drug addicts, or the people in the jail system. So they're just feeding another system. It's another cycle within a cycle within a cycle. If they can't get you working full time, and paying into their system of taxes and all of these things, where you're dedicating all of your life energy and all of your life force into their system, then they're going to get you into jail, or they're going to get you trafficking drugs, or they're going to get you, like, no matter what, they're making money off your back. And you have nothing to show for it at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But yeah, the amount of people I've talked to, it's insane. I've had reports from women that were, with an abuser, children were being abused, that have been told by lawyers to don't even bring it up. Like, here you are receiving legal advice because your children are being abused and you're trying to get away from the system, and the lawyers are telling you to not bring it up in court because you're going to lose your children. A system that's supposed to be designed to protect you, that if you attempt to even communicate the fact that you're in trouble, will ensure that you're in even more trouble. Like, it's absolute crazy making. Like, it's the exact same gaslighting that you experience in a narcissistic relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Where the world is not as it seems, and things get twisted around. Well, when you start getting through these family court systems and dealing with these police officers, and they do the exact same techniques, the exact same things to literally make you insane. I call it the trauma program, and it's just widespread psychological damage. So we're living in a world of traumatized individuals, and a lot of them are displaying high doses of narcissistic behaviors because of the amount of trauma they've experienced. As a defense mechanism, as a survival tactic. If no one ever listens to you as a child, and no one ever cares about you, eventually you have to shut those things off to survive, or it's just going to hurt too much. And before you know it, now you're the abuser.
Yeah, that's quite horrific.
I mean, it kind of helps explain why depression is, like, out of control.
Oh yeah, and you see those ads for depression meds on the television.
I see those all the time.
Yeah.
And then they go through all the side effects, and then I'm like, well, that's going to make you even more depressed because you'll need more pills for those.
Exactly. It puts you in a state of where you don't feel things, right? You don't feel the highs, you don't feel the lows. It's very robotic. in
Yeah.
a lot of ways. I know people need it at certain times to get out, but something you experience too when you're going through, like, say, psychological help, and you're seeing a therapist or a counselor, especially when you've experienced extensive amount of narcissistic abuse. Number one, very few of them are actually trained on trauma. So they want to diagnose you as borderline personality disorder and put you on all these pills, when in reality, you're just experiencing something like post-traumatic stress disorder or complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And if you do get a good one, where you can start to talk about these things, they reinforce the victim mentality, where, at some point you have to accept responsibility for the fact that this is where you are and understand your codependent behaviors to move past it and try to have a life for yourself. But in a lot of these situations, especially the ones that are government funded, the ones that are free, that you can get into if you don't have the money to pay for someone, you're constantly going over your story again and again and again and again. And you have these people oh, well, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong, which in one context is good to hear if you are holding a lot of guilt about it. But then in the same point, if you're just stuck in that place where you're going over it, all they're doing is re-victimizing you and keeping you in that state where you're in this perpetual loop of victimhood, which is perfect for the controllers that be, because now, you're highly susceptible, you're highly, what's the word, impressionable, you take, you take direction well, and you're almost terrified to kind of speak out or move out against things, which is perfect. When you're living in a world of tyranny, that and your rights are being taken away from you left, right, and center, like, then you have a population who's either dumbed down, numbed out, traumatized to the max, but in all these different stages of where nobody can really do anything about it. It's kind of perfect, really, for those in power.
Yeah,
Well,
and it's very cult. It's very much a cult within the political system.
yeah.
Well,
And oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, I was just going to say, because you said a cult, because, and this is something I dealt with in my personal situation, and I don't like to reiterate or go over too much of it because it is some dangerous information. But this family that was controlling this was a bloodline. We're talking that goes back to the thousands. They were given Ireland to run till the 1400s, and they bred back into Henry VIII's line. And what you realize is the individuals running, especially these very tight child trafficking rings that have judges in their pocket, that have police officers in their pocket, they're supplying children. This family alone, the uncle-in-law, flies planes to Little Dr. Lake. Well, guess who hangs out there? Prince Andrew, Prince Charles, Daddy Trudeau. It's an Oddfellows Lodge, which is a higher form of Freemasonry. So, and you start breaking this down, and you realize that these families that are in these political places that are operating these things, most of them are related or have some sort of relations, but they're involved in some of the most nefarious things that you could ever imagine. And they're all connected. It's a small group. And when you start really diving into these things and doing your research, you realize a lot of the lines tie back to the same places.
Yeah, it's no different from other royal, as it looks like they just marry each other within the same families.
Exactly, and those are the public ones. So now you have someone like Prince Andrew, who's been, spotted about the whole Epstein scandal, who just happens to be going to the same place that the uncle in this family is, flying people out. And there's little children involved, babies, who are being sexually abused. And there's a literal police officer covering it up, doctors supporting this stuff, and judges letting it go. And then you find out that the judge in this case, are you guys aware of the NXIVM scandal that took place?
I've heard of it. I don't know much about it, though.
Oh, it was a sex cult, anyways, and it came out, and he had ties to the son of Mexico's prime minister, and there was a lot of weird ties there in New York, and they were running this sex cult, and they were training some of these women by hooking them up to electrodes and making them watch snuff videos and to see how they react. Some of the women would puke and like typical MK Ultra stuff, but this was in the police, this was in the documents, you know, and this just was in court. Well, that was being funded by the Bronfman sisters, Claire Bronfman specifically. Now, Claire Bronfman is the heir to the Seagram fortune. The Seagram fortune, this was a company that started up in about, I believe, the end of the 1700s, 1800s in Canada, that were making alcohol and doing horse racing and things like that. They were the ones actually selling the alcohol to the Italian mafia during Prohibition. Now, I mention this because the judge in my case who actually gave access to the pedophiles of a baby is a Seagram. There are no coincidences here. Like, it's the same people. And that the Bronfmans actually, they have a lawyer, or they had, I'm not too sure if it's still in operation, they had a lawyer firm with the Rothschilds. It's called Bronfman and Rothschild. And to top it all off, this Bronfman family, they own the house next to Justin Trudeau in Montreal. And when this all started to happen, they sold it. And her father, Edgar Bronfman, was the head, please don't quote me on this, you'd have to look it up, the exact wording of it, of this Jewish organization within the political spectrum for both Canada and the United States, who actually got $2 billion in reparations for the Jews back in either 92 or 94. Like, it's all the same bloodlines. It's all the same people, and they're running kids, and they have blackmail operations, because we're looking at a world run on mafia wars, and it's hid under this idea of like government and left wing, right wing, and you know, social services, or food. You know, we have all of these systems set up to make it seem as if we're living in a normal world, but in reality, go ahead.
But it's not true. It's just all allegory or something, right?
Or it's a
euphemisms and stuff.
Exactly, and they designed the system. If you actually look into like our court structures, now we're going back to about the 1400s in the Gray's Inn. The Gray's Inn was the first court of the bar, the British accredited. Oh, what does it stand for? It's the first court of the lawyers. And back then, in order to even have your case heard before a court, you had to be a peerage individual. So you had to present your bloodline to the queen or king at the time, you know, provide your family crest, show your property, and send them a gift. And if they said, okay, well, then you would be considered what they called free. And that was called a free man back then. And then you could use the court system. So if someone stole from you, or, you know, that, then you could use it. But the peasants, the regular people, that wasn't that. They weren't allowed to access those services. So that court was actually set up only to protect the royals from each other. And all they've done is tweak it a little bit here and there. They've tweaked it to make it appear as if, you know, now it's for the general population. But it's not. It's still a boys' club.
Hey, Zachary.
Hi.
Hello. Can't hear you right now, but Ashley, this is Zachary. Zachary, Ashley. We were just discussing what was it, like the past court systems.
The first court of the bar it's called the Gray's Inn. It's actually still in operation. They have a few other courts than that. It's in England, London, England, and the Queen Elizabeth I, she was part in 1500. She was part of that. Francis Bacon, they were inducted into it. That really interesting history there. But it was a time when the only people who could use a court structure were those of peerage, of royalty, of that were barons or baronesses, and they could use it to get property back. But it wasn't something that, you know, the regular population could access. And we're not living under a system that's too different from then, because now it's depending on, you know, what lawyer you know, who knows who's paying off who, as to what type of justice you get.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. I'm guessing the already happened.
It's already still going on, sorta. I already asked like the first questions, and we were just discussing different subjects. Is there any questions you want to ask Ashley? Zachary?
Oh, just about what Nathan volunteered regarding the garbage bin
Oh,
here
oh,
in
yeah.
Michigan.
Actually, it wasn't in Michigan.
Hmm?
Yeah, it wasn't in Michigan. It was probably somewhere in the Asian countries.
What is this about?
Okay.
A baby was found in the garbage. Yeah, literally wrapped up in a black bag.
That's awful. Horrible.
Yeah.
Hope the kid is all right now.
Well, luckily they found the kid, and looks like they're gonna give the kid a safe place to be at.
Hope so.
Yeah.
Yep, so BC Crepa in the live chat says hold on. Left wing, right wing, it doesn't matter which side of the bird you fly on, they control it all. It's their phoenix. Mikey says, can it be considered animal cruelty to rip the wings off the phoenix pouring cement on them?
Huh.
It's really interesting when you look at the culture of what's going on right now. Like, a lot of people are waking up to the amount of criminality within the system, and now all of a sudden, we're getting these reports of going to war, and fires all over the place, and the world's falling apart, and all of it's just to keep people distracted and to keep them looking at who the real enemy is and what's really going on. And it's
look
really
at all these boogeymen. Look at all these boogeymen. Don't look at the real
exactly
enemy.
What's the biggest memes in the last little bit? Okay, so Epstein did not kill himself. That went on for months, and in a lot of ways that was just massive distraction. Like, the guy's gone, nobody's being held accountable, nobody really knows what went on, and now
I'll be right back using Chrome because Firefox is not cooperating.
Okay.
And what I noticed in the last couple of days, it's all these World War III memes, and oh, well, Zoomers are going to have to go to war and this kind of stuff, when we could be talking about the politicians who are actually making these decisions and things that are going on. It's as if it's turning into a big joke.
I mean, that's my number one passion, about the wars that's been going on. But I mainly just go after those who are, on their voting records. I'm like, well, you're voting to keep the system alive. So, yeah. I mean, I could tell that the whole thing with the World War III, and this and that, it was all just complete theater.
Yeah. And that's what it is. Actually, when you get into these occult systems, especially with these Masonic systems, as you move up through the ranks, there's certain rituals they do, and they play out certain things, like they pretend to slit your throat so you know not to talk, and It's literal theater, and that's something that they're instructed to do. When you look into these families, they're called, men of leisure back in the day. So what did they start? Because they had the money. What did they start studying? Oh, the arts and theater and writing and things like that. And we wonder why our culture and our society is so much infiltrated by these individuals who can control the narrative, because they've had so much time on their hands. And that's how they've been able to do it, is through things like theater and art and that. And now it's turned into television and movies. And you even look at, and that's something I've been discovering lately, is some of these artists that seem to be very nefarious, whether it's the Brima or Marina Abramovich, who seem to have very nefarious roots. There was one I found the other day, Francis Bacon, not the same Francis Bacon back from the 1500s, but a different individual. And if you look into his life, it's pretty clear that he was involved in something. And there's a documentary out there about him, and it's lords and actors coming out to talk about this man and what an amazing artist he was. Well, he was a masochistic homosexual who drew some of the most disturbing images you've ever seen in your entire life. And there are lords and actors talking about a brilliant man he was. He was an alcoholic. Like, it's insane. And this is who they surround themselves with, because they're all pretty mentally ill. But we're the mental ones, right? The ones pointing it out, the empathetic individuals, the ones not okay with what's going on, the ones speaking out. We're the crazy ones. But the psychopaths and the narcissists, they're perfectly fine, right?
It's pretty much all projection.
Exactly. What's that famous quote? Oh, there's this famous quote. I forget the exact, but if you accuse your enemy of doing the very thing that you're doing, it's the greatest form of obfuscation. I forget the exact quote, but it's something like that, where that's one of the clearest. I think it was put out by some Zulinski or something, one of those individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's just what we see going on in the world today. And it's really horrific. And until more people can, come to terms with that and see what's going on in their own community and make better decisions with their time, whether it's what they're doing for employment or what they're putting their money into, or, what causes they're getting behind, or where they're putting their time and things that they're speaking about, until we can do that better on an individual level, these individuals are going to continue to have the chips that they need to keep playing us for pawns. We're just pieces on a chessboard to them, and we give them the money to move us around.
Oh, Mikey just left a comment.
Yep, we'll show it. Wasn't it Sargon's law? Whenever an ideologue makes a character judgment about someone they are debating with, that character judgment is usually true about themselves.
Yeah, it's a Freudian slip.
Sargon of Akkad?
Yeah.
That's what it's named after. I call it a Freudian slip because everyone understands what that means.
Yeah, it just, Freud is usually, the Freudian slip is usually determining, like, to something related to a person's sexuality or their proclivities and relating back to their childhood kind of thing. But it definitely gives you a peering into their psychology, for sure, when you start to notice these patterns of behavior. And that's why I was speaking about the system and how they work. Like, I was literally threatened by police officers. I had these child protection agencies doing the exact same thing the abusers were doing. We're calling doctors totally out of town that had the equipment necessary to do the investigation needed in order to protect these children, calling them and telling them that I was crazy. No evidence, no nothing, just to ensure that no investigation took place. These are individuals within government structures saying they're protecting children who are operating literally like low-level criminals. And behaving in very criminal ways. Like, if you, as an individual, were to become aware of, say you were a nurse or a doctor, and you were to become aware of a child who's being endangered, and you had seen some evidence of that, and you didn't report it, you're now criminally culpable for what's happening to that child. But here we have a government agency who's been told that there's evidence of this child's abuse, who not only are unwilling to look at the present evidence, unwilling to have any type of investigation, and handing the children to the abusers. If that's not criminal, I don't know what is.
Yeah. It's organized crime.
Exactly. That we call government.
Well, it's really organized crime and terrorism.
Absolutely. That's, like I said, that's why I call it the trauma program. I laugh at that one video of Bush, right? Terrorism.
We gonna get them. We gonna get them.
And you're the terrorist. Like, you are the one terrorizing people just by saying that over and over and over again. It's a brainwashing technique. It's a manipulation, and that's exactly how these people operate. It literally makes you crazy when you look at it. And then if you have some, anybody could look at any child and feel bad. If that child's being abused, even if you're not that child's parent, you're going to feel bad about it. So you have these individuals trying to protect these children. And when they can't do that time and time and time again, or they're labeled, I had a woman who had appeared as a witness before the Supreme Court of Canada. She was a Supreme Court witness who had a master's in psychology and was going for her full doctorate in infant behaviors and trauma behaviors and things like that. Like, this was an expert, 60 plus years old. And she wrote me an affidavit. They literally said that her word meant nothing and treat her like crap in court. They could have easily destroyed her name, her ability to work, etc. just from that. That's criminal behavior. Who gives them that authority? And there's no accountability. And that's why I brought that constitutional question before the federal court, because in Canada, and I think you have similar things in the States, they have these acts and statutes where they've allowed these child protection agencies to go and kidnap children. They call it, apprehension or whatever, but it's kidnapping. And in order for a police officer to do something like that, somebody has to be charged criminally with abuse. There has to be some sort of evidence that that child is being abused to remove it from the situation. But we have these acts and statutes who allow these people called social workers, who don't even have to be registered in any type of accredited network. They don't even have to be registered. So there's no accountability, that literally can just go and kidnap children with no evidence, on nothing but hearsay. Some of them, they don't even need a court order, or they're using court orders that have been pre-signed off. It's absolutely insane. And then once they get you in the system, it takes months, years sometimes to have your case even heard. Then they use things like, well, the child is comfortable, and to move them again, well, that would be traumatic. So it's a back hole, right? So they've created the system in a way that they forcibly confine you and then just operate business as usual. And you're still the bad guy. And if you make it out alive, well, so be it. But most don't. Don't.
Kind of reminds me of that one collab that Filthy Heretic and Esso did, where a couple that was on their way to a hospital so that they could give birth to a child.
What?
There was all right, let me just DM it to you. Hold on.
I'll look at it after the stream sometime.
Well, anyway, the basic summary is a couple was on their way, was having had to make an emergency stop to a hospital because the mother was about to give birth, and the people at the hospital were giving them crap, and ultimately they took the child out away because supposedly the father was suspected of terrorism, even though there was no record of terrorism. There was even no reason for him to be suspected of terrorism. He was an Egyptian Christian for one, and of course that child under the Child Protection Agency is probably going through human trafficking right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's no accountability. There's no accountability at all. And then you want to hear how absolutely insane this is. And these are things that are written into their own laws. And this is in Ontario. I don't think this is laid out exactly the same in BC, but one of their reasons that they can give for abducting people's children is if you've been in the system before. If you're the mother, the parent, or the father, and you were in the system, that's enough of a cause for them to take your children. So here we have a system that's being propagated to society as something that is there to protect children, but they use it as an excuse that as a parent yourself, you won't be able to have children. So they're admitting to the fact that they traumatize individuals so badly and take such crappy care of them that they'll probably be, abusive parents themselves as a reason to take now the next generation of children from that person. This is how much of a mindfuck it is.
A vicious cycle.
Yeah.
So on one hand, they tell the public, okay, we're helping you. And if at any point they're held accountable for any of these things, we're working on it and we're doing the best we can. And we need more money for training. We just aren't trained enough to take care of children properly. Okay, so
boy.
You're not trained to take care of children properly, but you can stand before a court and say this individual who's done nothing wrong but went through your system is definitely going to abuse that child at some point. So they're better off in your care. Someone who admittedly cannot properly take care of children. Right. And this is what's going on every single day. And what's really disturbing is so few people are trying to do anything about it. Like you have individuals, and when you're in a situation like this, especially with abusers, one of the main things they do is they isolate you, right? So you're fighting for your children. You're completely isolated within a community. Now you're fighting the police, the child protection agencies, the court systems. Not only are you up against the abuser and the abuser's family, but they usually rally your family against you as well. They're very good at that, and the community. So you're completely isolated, fighting for children, your children, anyone's children, and then they go out of their way to isolate you from support. So whether it be advocates or doctors or and it just keeps growing, their little network just keeps growing and growing and growing. And then the community doesn't jump in and say, okay, we're going to help this individual. No, then they point their finger at you and say, oh, you must be a bad parent. This wouldn't have happened to you unless you were a bad parent. And you wonder why this continues, because so much of our population is completely ignorant to what's actually going on.
Yeah, crazy stuff.
It's one of those you'd have to see it to believe it. I know a lot of this stuff people have a hard time believing, but once you start digging into the documents, once you start looking at the actual laws, once you start communicating with the people who've gone through this system and reading their testimony, and I know a woman in Alberta whose daughters were being abused by her husband severely to the point where we have a 14-year-old now who's on not only anti-incontinence medicine because she's still wetting the bed, but she's also on sleeping pills. So they're forcing her to go to sleep, and she talks about people standing over her bed, and she made disclosures to teachers I saw a court order in this case, and there's more than enough evidence to show that these children have been abused pretty much their entire lives. This judge made this court order where not only is she gagged, can she not speak about it, but she's not allowed to talk to the teachers, and she has written letters from previous teachers where the children disclosed abuse. So what did the judge do? Oh, they wrote an order where she's not allowed to talk to the teachers anymore. And she's not allowed to take her children to see the doctor anymore. No, only the abuser can take the children to the doctor. And these are the things these judges are doing to hide this.
Gosh.
It's absolutely insane. Had I not seen it with my own two eyes and not gone through this myself, I might be on the other end going, oh, this couldn't possibly be happening. I guarantee you it is. I guarantee you it's extremely widespread, and the entire Child Protection Agency is set up for one reason and one reason only: to make money for the government. That's it. It has nothing to do with the protection of children. And whether that's funneling,
I don't doubt that.
and
I
whether,
don't doubt that.
exactly, and whether that's funneling money from one agency to another, or like in Ontario, they can literally, they get bursaries in Ontario for the adoption of babies, $20,000. So this agency can kidnap your children and adopt them out, and the government says, here you go, here's 20 grand for adopting out that child. It doesn't make any sense. And in the States, I know that there are certain states where if you have a handicapped child, you get quite a bit more money per month for that. So you have children that have handicaps or mental illnesses that are getting upwards of $20,000 a month from the government for them. And these group homes are not giving them the treatment they need. They're not giving them the medication. They're maybe having $500 a month spent on them. Where is that $19,500 a month going? Where is it going? Because the kids aren't seeing it.
Yeah, it's going to the money, the criminals that are supposed to, quote, take care of us, unquote.
Right. It's so they can get a new car every year, and they can put money into this program and that program, and it's an absolute nightmare. And they can pay off judges and lawyers and police people to keep their mouths shut, and doctors or whoever they need to pay off depending on what situation. It's astronomical. It's a literal blackmail program, because the only way that you can keep these politicians under your wing from not speaking out, from not doing anything about it if they're not heavily invested in these groups, is blackmail. And that's what it is. It's mafia. So they blackmail them, and they ensure that they're going to play ball.
Oh, Mikey commented.
Oh, the latest one. If people resisted against immoral acts, the ones in power wouldn't just be doing their job as easily as they would be disincentivized from doing unethical acts.
Could you repeat that one again? It cut out a little bit. I'd like to.
I'll read the whole thing again.
Oh, I see it now.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something, if we as a community rallied around these individuals, like if there was a woman fighting one of these court cases where, people were being abused, if the community rallied around her and showed up to court that day, I guarantee you that judge would have a hard time making these super illegal orders, because then there would be more people watching it. But because so few people know, and so few people rally around these individuals, it's like when I brought my constitutional question before the federal court, like, do you think anybody was even paying attention? Sure, there were a lot of abused individuals that want to take part, but a lot of these individuals have no money left. They're so traumatized. They have such severe post-traumatic stress disorder that even speaking to them, they seem manic because they're all over the place because of the trauma. So it's very easy for they're out of their mind. They're crazy. No, they're severely traumatized. The system's set up that way, right?
Yeah.
That's something that I found that working with these family court groups and that, and the other thing is too, there's a lot of information going around about common law right now, about how you can use the common law to get around it. You know what I mean? But the only courts that look at common law, you have to construct your own court, because their courts don't look at it and they still do whatever they want. You know, like even though they have these laws to follow, it's on a per case level, and they make up the rules as they see fit. And this common law, there are individuals out there requesting payment from parents just trying to get their kids back in gold and silver. And they're providing them with information and documents that are never going to go anywhere. So there's another system. So if you don't get caught up in their system, now we have these other systems popping up to give you false hope and to have you feeding into that one. It's like, at what point do we realize that these are just cycles within cycles within cycles, and realize that any individual that we put in power to make decisions for us is never going to do the right thing for us? They're going to do the right thing for them, their cronies, and whoever's calling the shots. And it sure as hell ain't the people.
No, not the people.
It's pretty much a bunch of kangaroo courts.
It's exactly what it is. It's exactly.
It's not justice, it's just us.
Exactly.
There ain't enough coffee in the world for all this madness.
No, and it doesn't seem to be getting better. Even though people are waking up, they're getting sucked into a lot of the different disinformation campaigns that are running, where they think that they're part of some sort of information coming out, but in reality, they're just getting sucked into another drama that in the end, you know, is just taking up their time.
Yeah.
And it's really sad to watch. I know some of these women who are fighting, and every day they fight, and they just are so hopeful that eventually this will end, that they're just suckers. They're suckers for these individuals that are going to tell them, oh, you just got to do this one thing, and you just got to do this one thing, and they're sick. These people are getting tired. They're getting exhausted. They're, you know, because they're just 24/7, go. They're learning, you know, grammar, and they're learning all these new things, which is, it's good to learn those things, but when it's at the expense of your own health, because you just want something to be right, you realize that you've been sucked into a trap that's just destroying your health. And by the time they actually realize that all of this running didn't produce the results that they wanted, it's too late. You know, we're talking cancers, we're talking all kinds of health issues, because they were too busy trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed under the same modalities and information that created the problem in the first place.
And you wonder why the fertility rate in the West is so low.
Yeah.
Because it ain't worth it for most people.
No.
Well, and people are sick too. Like,
Yeah.
Between the food and the work weeks and the lives that we're living, and like this just is not a healthy life. And yeah, and then you have information campaigns being sent out where the world is overpopulated, and, you know, having a child is going to kill everyone else and that kind of stuff. Falling for it, right? Because they don't want educated individuals. And the ones who fall for it more often than not, or more intelligent than not, or more empathetic than not, that want to do the right thing for everyone else, that maybe don't have the time to look into these things. So they are going off the narrative that they're being told, because they're just busy working, or, you know, caught up in whatever they're doing. And these are the ones who aren't reproducing. But then we have, you know, ones who are reproducing that don't have educations, that are very easy manipulated. I'm witnessing that in Canada right now, where they're bringing in these immigrants like crazy, and you have, you know, people who've lived here that are unwilling to work at, like, say, the coffee shop for $5, $6, $7, $8 an hour, they're just refusing to do that work. So they bring in these immigrants with like 5, 6, 7, 8 kids, give them tons of money a month to live, and they'll work the corner store. They'll work that job because it's better than what they had back home, which isn't driving change within the nation. It's just bringing the standard of living down for everyone. It's a perfect plan. Did you have any other questions or anything specific you need to talk about?
Let's.
Just something to lighten the mood. Florida man. Bad timing. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry.
What are some of the most common patterns within this narcissistic system, other than the projection, the isolation, and the setting up more things on top of more things to keep the victims, or like some of the other common patterns?
One of the main things that these types of individuals and systems use, it's what is the term for it? Well, give me one sec. I just had it like an hour ago. Plausible deniability, where a threat is made or a comment is made where the individual it's being made toward knows exactly what that individual is getting at, but other individuals who are witnessing it take place could perceive it as something else. And the courts work on that a lot, plausible deniability. You know what I mean? So when you have your children in a situation where they've taken them away from you and you haven't done anything wrong, and they want you to go through these programs that you know that they have full control of these doctors and these people, and they're going to make judgments on you based on the fact that they want to keep them in care, that there's no fairness, that they already know what they're going to put on a piece of paper. All they're doing is building up false evidence towards you. So and the people in care in these systems will say things to you like, well, you want to see your children again, don't you? So on one hand, it's a threat. Like, if you don't do this, you're never going to see your kids again. It's a total threat, right? But in front of a court, it's excused. Well, you do want to see your children again, don't you? And it's all of these situations where you're not given a choice. It's the plausible deniability, where you're being threatened, or you're being tortured, or you're being manipulated, but you can't put your finger on it. You know, they always got a way out. Well, I didn't mean that. You know, with the narcissist, well, that's not what I was saying, or I didn't say that. You know.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really common tactic. That's a very it's a brainwashing technique. It's a type of gaslighting. What else do we have here? The isolation's huge, right? Where they go out of their way and they use their connections within these systems to, you know, Joe Blow is friends with blah, blah, blah. And, you know, there are rules that they're not supposed to talk about you outside of your case or outside of what's going on. But they don't care. They don't follow that, you know, and they'll call doctors, pretend to be someone else, and make these false statements and things like that. So you have full-on criminality. And then there's also stalking. They're stalkers. Exactly. And it's not even just the gang stalking. It's the harassment, like calling your house or sending you text messages or coming by your house unannounced, you know, and a certain amount of this is allowed within the system. But then they speak to your neighbor and they have your neighbor, you know, calling for them. And Abusers do this too. They appear to be the victim and they say, oh, this person did this to me and this da 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 da. So they get the flying monkeys. So now they have these other individuals, more often than not, good individuals that think that they're helping this broken individual, not realizing that they've been sucked in to the actual abusers program, and now they're helping to continue to abuse the victim. But they think they're righteous in it because they've been manipulated as well. A lot of triangulation, where they will say, well, this person said this, or it's just a lot of manipulative tactics. I'm not great with the exact verbiage. Let me see. I'm going to see if I can find
all right,
a list. Then I can go through.
Oh, Boggy just asked a question.
hold up. What's our opinion? Should you compromise with the criminal system and listen to courts, or consider your children lost and keep fighting? You wouldn't pay crypto to ransomware, would you?
That's a tough one. It's a tough one because it really depends on the situation. There have been people who have been successful in getting their children back, but if you're in a situation where there's sexual abuse, there's other individuals tied into it, whether it's police officers or court officials, or you know what I mean, you get the lay of the land. The chances of you ever being successful is pretty much non-existent. They will bankrupt you. They will take everything that you have. My advice is to not participate, because as long as you're participating, you're consenting to your own abuse. And it's a sad and it's a shitty place to be, and it's not great at all. But just by walking into a courtroom, just by having a lawyer, you're telling the court that you're infirm, that you need someone to represent you, that you can't make decisions for yourself. You've now consented to your own abuse.
I was going to say that it's kind of a hard call for me personally, assuming that anything like that were to happen to me, and if I were to have any kids, it's just, I don't know until it happens.
The problem is in a lot of these cases, they take them and then they they get you into these programs and seeing these. This is one they use, right? Okay, so they steal your children from you, and then you get to visit them, right? Okay, or you get to call them, and it's been weeks since you've seen your children, and you get to talk to them for 1 hour. And when you go to see them for that 1 hour, they get really upset. Obviously, they're living with a stranger. They haven't seen you for a week or however long it may be, and they get upset. And when they go home, they're still upset. You know what I mean? Like, they're still charged. And with kids, they act out. They get aggressive when they're angry and no one's listening, kind of thing. And what the social workers will say, well, visiting with the family is upsetting the child. Well, yeah, no shit. You've stolen a child. You've taken them out of their environment and away from the one person or the people who care about them. And then you just allow them to just see them, which not only traumatizes the parent, it traumatizes the child. And then you have an excuse for saying, well, that's really hard. Seeing the parent is really hard on the child. We don't think that this is good for them psychologically. So they've created an environment and a situation where the other is inevitable. And now you're being held accountable for something that was never you to blame in the first place.
A catch-22, in other words.
Exactly. Or they have their own psychologists that they've paid off, or who's part of the network that they say, oh, you just got to go to this assessment, or you just got to go see this person. And that person, under their authority with their degree, will say, yeah, they're mentally unstable. They'll twist your words just like a narcissist, just like a psychopath. They'll twist the information they give you. They themselves, these criminal child protection agents, will literally falsify documents. I don't know how many articles I've read in the last year of social workers being charged criminally after falsifying years of documentation on children in order to illegally steal them. It comes up almost every day. And those are the ones that are held accountable. I would say never give up on your children, but at the same time, definitely you need to make sense of what type of situation you're in. And if this is a situation that's going to do more harm than good, don't kill yourself trying to fight something that's unfightable. Because I watched that happen with individuals where they're literally exhausted. They're coming down with cancers. They're turning to drugs and alcohol because it's just the constant getting the court documents, getting the information, receiving these affidavits of lies and abuse, or being before a court where no evidence is taken. All of that is heavily, heavily traumatic. And if you're not an extremely strong individual, it will break you. And even if your kids do survive in the system, you're not going to be alive to see them once they're adults. You, at some point, you have to make a choice of what is in your best interest, what is in everyone's best interest, because they're not going to play fair, they're not going to play ball, and if you don't have a lot of money or a lot of connections, you're pretty much up shit creek. I don't know if that was a sufficient answer or not. I apologize.
Mikey says that's a great answer.
Okay, cool. I rant sometimes. I'm sorry. Let me know if I'm going off or if I'm hitting too many things.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine.
I get really emotionally triggered by this kind of stuff.
That's very understandable.
Cody Forred left a comment.
What?
Well, I just said that Cody Foray left a comment. And look, Patrick Smith from Distant Brawls here.
Oh, wow. Hey, Patrick. I wonder if he wants in. He's a very, very, really cool guy. Big time voluntarist YouTuber. He has his own kid. He very much loves his little girl.
Yeah, and he does a lot of work around Texas.
Mm-hmm.
For what I've seen.
Oh, yeah, he does. He has his own good community down there. Code Foray about the Taco Cat. Was that it? I don't know what.
Yeah, Cody Foray, yes.
Okay, yeah, I saw it. So, Pat, would you like to end the stream call? I could send you the invite link.
He said, no time today, fam. Just saying hello. Thanks, though. That's what he said.
Cool.
Yeah, it's really getting to a point where us as individuals, if we see that these things are happening, we really have to start building communities within ourselves and getting to a point where we can, help each other, and whatever that means, live sustainable lives or live outside of these systems, because it's not going to get better, especially with what we're seeing in the world today. It's just going to get worse. Something big is...
Yeah, it's part of why I'm thinking about moving to a different county from where I am now. Somewhere more rural, away from the big cities. It's
Absolutely.
crazy.
Absolutely. And with this, war looming and, the things that they're planning, and it's we're in a pretty scary situation, to be honest. And when you understand, Agenda 21 or now 30 or whatever they call it, and a lot of the things that's gone on throughout history when these movements have taken place, like I think the last time there was a real movement of the people against the controlling elite was the royals versus the parliamentarians in Britain in about the 1700s. I think it was the end of the early 1700s, and what it was it wasn't totally authentic because it was called the royals versus the parliamentarians, but the parliamentarians were being headed by a different sect of the royals who didn't have like the second son or the third son that wasn't up for the crown, and they turned away. So it wasn't a legitimate move of the people, but it was a movement of the people that realized that they weren't allowed to use the courts, that they weren't allowed to do these things, and they literally fought with their lives. It was a civil war. It was a legitimate civil war. But the controllers behind it were not, legitimately for the people. It was just one end of the mafia using the people in order to get rid of another end of the mafia, which is very common throughout history. The more you go through history, the more you realize these things are taking place. And I think that's exactly what's taking place right now, is the people are waking up to their chains. So we have these people coming out claiming to be for the people, claiming to be for change. But in reality, they're just representing one sect of this mafia, and they're using the people to get rid of a different sect of the mafia so they can have more control. And in the end, who ends up with the lives lost? The everyday people.
Yeah, I think you're referring to the English Civil War, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Led by Oliver Cromwell.
Yeah. Yeah, and then the American Civil War, and and then what do we have after that? The Federal Reserve, not long after. So it's just, at some point the people have to realize that they're just pawns in a game, and we got to quit playing the game. We got to quit playing their game.
Yep. Quit playing their game. Quit believing in their lives. Quit believing in them.
Exactly. And like one thing too, a lot of these children get taken into care because some neighbor called in because, a kid was crying or something. We live in these societies, especially if those people themselves don't have children. And if you've ever been to the grocery store or something and saw a kid having a tantrum, you'll see people there who are just looking at the mother like she's some kind of evil beast, and maybe she's had a hard day and she's having to drag him out of there. And, some of the individuals, oh, well, that's abuse. Well, kids throw tantrums. So you have people who are like, oh, I'm going to call child protection and they're going to make sure that kid's safe. When in reality, it was a kid throwing a tantrum. That person is now going to have their child kidnapped under a false allegation, and they're actually going to be abused, and they're actually going to be put through child trafficking. Like, if you see something like that going on, reach out. If you're at you'd be amazed at, like, if you're out in public and the kid's throwing a tantrum, if you just go up to him and say, hey, what's wrong? 9 times out of 10, that kid's going to stop behaving that way because they're embarrassed and they're not getting the reaction they want. And it's not a legitimate situation where they're just having a tantrum because they want the chocolate bar and they're not getting the chocolate bar. And as somebody outside of the situation, like maybe mom hasn't slept in 3 days, maybe she's got a baby at home and she just, is out of, just to say, hey, buddy, what's going on? What's up? And they'll usually
comment.
Stop.
What?
Yeah, I was waiting for my chance to say, in light of what Ashley just said, I actually experienced something similar when I was a kid. My brother was acting up over at Sam's. It's basically a bookstore, a buy-in bookstore that is owned by the same people that own Walmart. He was acting up, and we had to get it out of there. and people made those accusations. Thankfully, nothing bad happened. Thank God. Just
Yeah. And that's exactly it. Like if you see somebody struggling, we're in a society now where if an accident happens, most people take out their phones and just videotape it and watch or freeze. Like ask the person, do you need help? Is there anything I can do? We've been forced into this situation where we're all like pinned against each other as if we're all competing for something, and because of it, we're just getting picked off one by one and eaten alive by this system.
Yeah.
oh, Bucky left a comment
Uh,
regarding the state started cracking down on. Yeah, that one.
the self-sustaining off-grid people and preppers, they won't allow it. Even small houses that won't break the bank are being banned. And yeah,
the tiny house movement. Just
You got to get around that. You got to get around that. Like right now, I'm building a van, and it's not like there's not going to be a shower in it. There's not going to be technically running water, things like that. But it's going to be off the grid. It's going to have an electrical system in it. You have to find a way to get around it. And yeah, you might not have all the bells and whistles that you used to have, or all the comforts, or all the things, but if it means a little bit of freedom, and I say do it in a vehicle, because if you got to get up and move, you can.
not to be rude, but I think we were trying to read the rest of his comments.
Oh, sorry. All right. So he had. There's even a plan since Obama's administration to shut down the power grid, pretend to be a cyber attack, and start confiscating prepper savings and food, redistribute them, and arrest them.
Because they don't want people to fight back. They don't want people to be self-sustaining. I mean, were it not for, I'm willing to bet that were it not for the fact that housing were so expensive in the first place, I'd already have my own place. Unfortunately, I don't. It's just.
If there's something I learned going up against these individuals, and there was many times when I could have easily been killed. Like there was vehicle accidents, there was people hanging around my house, like there was a lot of things going on that most individuals would find very concerning, but you have to find some way around it. You know what I mean? Like you have to find, you just can't give up. And it doesn't matter what their plans are. They're always going to have a plan, and then they're going to have a backup plan, and they're going to have a backup plan on the backup plan. You just got to get smart. You got to get smart, and you got to do what you can do. And that's all you can do. But we can't just sit here and be like, oh, well, it's going to happen anyways. So, you know what I mean? Like, okay, maybe you can't do the tiny house, or maybe it's too in one place. I think being mobile and being able to move operations depending on what does happen in what area is essential to be able to get out if a power grid goes down or something like that. Like it's one thing to have a bug out area, you know what I mean? But at the same time too, like how bugged out is that? How far away from civilization are you? How much are you able to sustain yourself, especially with individuals in Canada? Like you're looking at winter 6-7 months of the year. What kind of food preparations are you going to have? One thing I think is essential is that every individual has an edible food guide, you know, and you understand that what grass or what tree or what isn't poisonous. And if something like that were to happen, you can pick a mushroom or you can pick a plant and eat it and live. These are things that our ancestors, they knew about plant medicine, they knew about plant food. We've lost that in the last 100 years. We have to get it back. We can't be so dependent and reliant on their systems of control.
Indeed.
There are plants out there in our backyards that will heal us better than any medicine that, the doctor could prescribe. Or the medicine the doctor's prescribing is made out of the plant in the backyard. We're just not aware of it. You know what I mean? Because and to pick it is illegal, but it's because it's fully controlled. Like St. John's wort and things like that. Like a lot of these things grow naturally, and they're weeds. We pull them out of our gardens every year.
Mikey adds, says, no. What I meant is that the state won't allow it, but I encourage going against the state. Never give up freedom, but be prepared. Be 3 steps ahead and know all the workarounds.
And especially what you mentioned earlier with making communities and counter economies. That's what he added.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. And that's just it. They're going to continue to push back, and that's fine. Keep pushing back. There's 2 ways we can go about this, right? Like we can get that defeatist mentality, or we can allow these extremely hard situations to turn us into very strong individuals. But that's a choice that individual makes. Is this situation going to destroy me? Am I going to allow myself to be debilitated or taken down by it? Or am I going to allow myself to be forged in fire and become indestructible? That's up to the...
Okay, yeah. Now you're reminding me of Garth Brooks' song, Standing Outside the Fire.
I don't know that one.
Oh yeah, you're from Canada. You probably would not know. Yeah, he's a country singer. That's not really important, just...
I really appreciate you guys letting me on to talk today, because these are the types of conversations that I think are really important in this day and age, that people get together and start talking about these types of things, because it's with certain things we're seeing in the media and the news, and the individuals that are making these plans, things are definitely heating up. And the more we can communicate with each other, the more we can get information out, the more people, who may be prepared for if shit hits the fan in their own lives or on a bigger scale.
Oh yeah. Yeah, thank you for coming on. It was a good idea to set this stream up.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, something tells you these occurrences are rather common in Alberta. Just a hunch, since I know someone that lives in Alberta.
Well, Alberta's mostly oil money, so you're looking at Rockefellers, Clinton, Nixon, those types of family lines. The West Coast is mostly these old school Nazi kind of types, Rockefeller money. The East Coast is more the Jewish backing, and it's mafia wars.
Mm-hmm.
It's all mafia. So then you're looking at the Rothschilds on the other side. They're all intermixed and interrelated, but they keep to themselves and protect their own. But yeah, Alberta's pretty bad for it because of the old blood there. British Columbia, by its name alone, is completely owned and operated and run by British royals and blue bloodlines and Masonic elites. And that's all of Canadian governments. It's all of, I dare to say, Australian governments as well, both British monarchies, constitutional monarchies. Britain's awful. The States is no better, though, right? Like, you just don't know who's working for who. A lot of them changed their names at some point, but it's all the same bloodlines.
I'm gonna have to look into that. I mean, I'm just not sure.
Trump.
I mean,
Trump.
whatever they.
His real name's Trump Heller. He's a German Jew. His name was changed a couple generations back.
Again, I'm going to have to look into it. I'm going to have to look at the source material.
Yeah.
Pull it up. Trumpeller is the actual name.
Well, I reckon you actually have the materials with you. So, any specific citation you had in mind?
No, just peerage. You just ancestry. I can type it in and pull it up. I don't have like the links ready, but you can pull up his ancestry and just go through the lines and find it yourself. It doesn't take long.
Six Fox asks about what you just said about Trump, German Jew.
Yeah, he's from a German Jewish family. His real last name is Trumpeller. His grandfather changed it to Trump.
And El Paso says she knows.
Dun dun dun.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they're all related. They're all related. A lot of these lines came out of France. Okay, so these lines came out of Egypt. They moved into France, and around the 800s, they moved from France into Scotland, Ireland, England. Ancient bloodlines. They follow the pyramid. A lot of this is Egyptian, Book of the Dead type religious inclinations. And you have the Sicilians. You look at the mobsters and that they're of the same genetic lines, came out of there. Canaanites, the Phoenicians. If you look into the beginning of the Gray's Inn, around just after its creation, Queen Elizabeth's main advisor was William Cecil. William Cecil was a Phoenician. They were the Venetians before, and in the 100 years previous, they had gone out of their way to kill off. There was families within Britain that had sheep shearing businesses and things like that. So they had money, and they were lending the money to the royal court for things like wars and things like that. And what these Phoenicians did is they went through and they had these families killed off or interned or put away for different crimes. So the only place that the British royalty could get their money to fund these things was through these Phoenicians, and they were the ones running the Silk Roads. These were the Canaanites of old. And in fact, Francis Bacon, who wrote the Bible, the King James version of the Bible with John Dee, who is the court magician, he was William Cecil's nephew. And he was also what do you call it? But he was part of that first court of the bar as well. He's in the books. And there's talk that was William Shakespeare, and he was also Queen Elizabeth's bastard son. Shakespeare was actually illiterate, and because he was a royal, he had to, he wasn't allowed to publish under his own name. So all of the works of Shakespeare were actually the works of Francis Bacon. So the information that's in that King James Bible, a lot of it, the way it was reworded from the Council of Nicaea and the original documents were specifically set up to help run these courts of the bar. And if you know anything about common law and the common law movements, they all talk about, well, if you just go back to this quote in Matthew, or this quote in John, or this quote here, this is what the common law is built on, is the King James version of the Bible, which was written by Francis Bacon, translated, and he was part of the first court of the bar. So the very people that are instrumental in the courts are writing the documentation and the quote-unquote religious information that apparently is backing it. That's insane.
Yeah.
Citation needed.
Yeah, do your research.
Homework fallacy. Sorry, but if you're that confident, you should have the materials with you or be able to point to said materials. You can't just say it out of the blue and place the burn on the critic. That's not how it works.
You're welcome to do your own research into Francis Bacon and or John Dee.
Here we go again. I'm just gonna get out of here before I blow a vessel.
These are the things that are taught to the occult. These are the things that are taught to the Masons. These are the things that are the hidden history that is kept within certain groups so they understand what gives them the authority to do what they're doing. I'm just trying to bring light to it. That's all.
Yeah, he's kind of touchy when it comes to like research and stuff. He kind of needs to where to start on or something like that. He needs like a citation or something.
Well, that's
how
what
it works.
The 1500s. If you like, I can pull it up right now. That's Francis Bacon, John Dee, and King James Bible. Francis Bacon and the James First Bible. The 1611 King James Bible is ornamented with Bacon symbols in my own special copy of the edition. Blah, 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 blah. Here. He wrote it.
All right, I'm going to
Here you go.
send that to him.
The first edition of the King James Bible, which was edited by Francis Bacon and prepared under Masonic supervision, bears more Mason marks than the Cathedral of Strasbourg, Manly P. Hall. From a lecture, Rosicrucian and Masonic Origins, 1929. Here's a little quote. They kind of leave John Dee out of this a little bit because he was unknown. He was the court magician. And they go out of their way to, but it's widely known that John Dee and Francis Bacon were the ones who were writing the St. James or the King James version of the Bible. Because before then, we're talking Old English. It was a different language, right? They've adapted it. And a lot of the New English comes from things like Shakespeare, which was written at the same time. Because Shakespeare was actually hanging around, he was an actor, and he was hanging around these theater houses, and that's why Bacon put that information in his name, because he was around. They lived during the same time. They were all in fact, the court of the bar, the Gray's Inn, both Elizabeth and Bacon were in that court of the bar, and Shakespeare performed at the same time. They were all in the same place at the same time. They all knew each other. They all knew each other. Check it out, Gray's Inn. Gray's Inn, or you can look at YNN, which is actually, or I think it's YN or YNN, which is the Old English version of inn.
Okay.
And it's still one of the courts of the bar. I think there's 4, and you have to be in one of these bar registries in order to be a lawyer today. I think there's a couple states that don't require you to be part of the bar in order to practice, but for the most part, you have to be part of the bar.
Yeah, Zachary's coming back in. I just sent what you just sent to me, so. I think he sort of jumps to a conclusion or something.
I know it's crazy information. I know these things are out there, but it's I think it's instrumental for us to understand why things are happening today the way they're happening if we understand the history and when it started and who was in charge of it and how these things took place. I think it's absolutely imperative to understand these things, to really get a good look on what's happening today, because a lot of this history is being wiped out, or we're not being taught it, or we're being taught a different version.
Yeah, the old version before copyright was really an important run.
Absolutely. Like, here's a perfect example. A perfect example of how history is being rewritten. You have someone like one of the Roman leaders. What was the name? Sorry, give me 1 second here. Tiberius. You have one of the Roman kings, Tiberius. And if you look at the Wikipedia will tell you that he was a great leader and he did these things and blah, 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 blah. But if you actually find books written by people who were alive during the time, those books will tell you that this great leader had children come into his bathhouse. And one of the things that he enjoyed more than anything else was having children nibble on his testicles as he swam. And those are people that are, during that time, seeing what's going on and writing about it. But you're not going to read about that on Wikipedia. And these are the kinds of things that we need to look into. These are where these bloodlines are coming from. The Romans, even before that. These are just some of the things that I've found during my research. There's tons of stuff out there, but this is where my focus was, because the family I was dealing with and up against it were part of these lines that dated right back to these people. So that's how I came across it, was doing the peerage and the history of the individuals who were still to this day operating child trafficking rings, directly related to these individuals hundreds of years ago. That's not a coincidence.
No, it doesn't sound like it.
It's a program, right? It's a program.
Yeah.
In fact, the reason I found out the Tiberius stuff is because this individual wanted to call our son together Tiberius, which I thought was very odd. And I didn't understand at the time the symbology of it until I looked into it, and only to find out that guess what? The oldest Roman ruin in London is named after his family's last name. Like, that's not a fucking coincidence. I'm like, here he is wanting to name my son this Roman ruler's last name, like give him the name of this Roman ruler, only to find out that the oldest, and it's called the Crofton, I'll go ahead and say it, the Crofton, the oldest Roman ruins in London, is named after this family who's trafficking children. I'll put a link to that. There's no coincidences here. These are the people calling the shots.
From B. Krebs, Ashley, explain why these elite families abuse their own children, why they want to create psychopathy and people who can switch off.
Here, make me do this, sorry. Control. It's power and control. When you have individuals that are so broken, that are so absolutely broken through child abuse, that they will commit atrocities themselves, they're not going to go against the family. This is how you ensure complicit, and it solves multiple reasons for them. They only want the ones who are strong enough to survive, and they think love and niceness, those are weaknesses. Crying is weaknesses. It's all weakness to them. So they do these things for multiple reasons. Why? So they get the strongest of the strong. So they split the personalities. Also, they found psychologically, when you do these things and you split the personalities, you can put the memories in places that they don't remember. The main personality doesn't remember. So you have an individual who's broken and controlled, but actually can't tell people what they've been through because they don't remember, without heavy amounts of therapy. Sometimes they break. They say the programming usually starts to come apart around 30 years old. And the individuals that are psychopathic usually go on to get positions of power, and the ones who aren't usually end up on drugs or on the streets, or, you know, running drugs for them, kind of thing. Like they're broken individuals, but they put them in different positions. It's all part of the program. And also, like, when you traumatize a child at that age, you find out what they're made out of. So a child who's going to fight back, a child who's going to, you know, go quiet, you get different characteristics about them. And if they're good at singing, you know, some of them will force them to entertain. And if they don't entertain, well, then they'll be abused. So these children learn very quickly how to entertain because they don't want to be abused. And before you know it, you got world-class known singers who've been singing their whole lives. And the thing is they were forced into that because they didn't want to be raped that day. And we wonder why they control the music industries and it's absolutely insane. And you can see the evidence of this if you look at some of the Nazi techniques of how they had these programs running. That's where kindergarten comes from, the word kindergarten, where they would take these children and run them through tests to find out what they were good at. And then they would put them into those positions from a very young age or train them in it. It's all MK Ultra techniques. Is that good enough? I hate
does that answer the question, B. Kespa? I think that it pretty much answers the question.
Yeah, I think so too. It's hard for me to talk about that kind of stuff because this is something I witnessed, especially with my youngest son. They started abusing him. I had him safe for about, 6 months of his life. And he was 8 months old when that Seagram judge gave them overnight access and weekends, not even a month later. And the condition that this child would come back in, he stopped wanting to walk. It was just absolutely horrific. He'd have pinholes in his armpits and on the bottoms of his feet, and he'd be terrified for you to touch his fingers or toes, and just things that don't happen to children overnight unless something's happened to them. Like even with normal kids, like say you have a kid who stubs his toe. You know what I mean? And then the next day you go to put a sock on and he jerks his foot back, because he remembers that he stubbed his toe yesterday and it hurt. And because he had that hurt. And that, like, kids, they lose confidence. Even babies just starting to walk. If they fall too many times, they don't want to walk for a while because they think they're going to fall. So you got to build up their confidence again so they can start going. So as a parent, when you're giving a child to these individuals in one condition, and sometimes in under 2 hours, they would come back completely shut down to the world, completely in a different condition, what's happened to that child. They don't want to be touched. They don't want to be changed. They don't want to be clean. They're screaming. They're waking up all night long for no reason, screaming at the top of their lungs. It's horrific. I don't even want to get into it because it's absolutely horrific. And the entire system is set up to make these things go away and to make abuse and trauma look like it's normal.
Poor kid. I really feel for you.
Oh, that's why I don't like talking about my story, because I'm not trying to gain sympathy from people or things. I just want people to understand how bad it is.
Yeah, I understand.
We need to fight within our own borders. You know what I mean? Because the enemy's here. The enemy's nowhere else. The enemy's in positions of power.
Been here.
The enemy's taking kids all over the place and putting them through these things. And it's all done through government agencies. And it's hidden under these falsities and ideas of law and courts and systems and justice. None of it's real. It's all bullshit. All of it. It's one elaborate lie, play, drama, production. How ironic is it too? This first court of the bar is having plays done by quote unquote Shakespeare. And you're telling me these people do not understand that this is a performance. Like and that's in the 1500s. It's almost 600 years ago. It's all a play. It's all a performance. It's just a performance piece. It's a joke. It's a joke. And a lot of people are buying it.
And a really sick joke.
Yeah, it's a really sick joke. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's not at all funny.
Mm-mm. No, it's not. And that's why it's really important too. Like if people come out with stories that seem out there, that seem, I know there's a lot of agents too out there in the truth movement, you know, pushing things and trying to derail the narrative and, you know, fakers. But for a lot of, when you have a victim coming out saying they were ritually abused their entire lives, and these are the things, don't discredit them. Don't discount them. This whole idea of false memory system or false memory syndrome, you can see when it was developed. And the guy who developed it, well, I don't know if it's that situation, but anyway, the guy who developed that synopsis of false memory syndrome had something. He was charged with something very serious himself. I don't want to misquote it because there's some other individuals that have done things, but these people are all part of these systems.
What's the name of this person?
I'll have to look it up. Sorry, there's somebody yelling outside. I'm just going to mute myself for a minute. One second.
Well, I'm looking at the chat and there's some funny back and forth going on between Jaguar and El Paso.
Huh.
Two trips to the ranch. I'm calling Dr. Phil. Prepare to meet your maker, your ice maker. Joking.
Oh boy.
Huh? Looks like the guy's name, Peter J. Fred. A PhD from Princeton. There's some guy just like drunk and screaming outside. Hold on 1 second.
All right. From Cody Foray. It's a bad joke from the Joker at the Dark Knight movie 2012. Boop.
Yeah.
Okay, here you go. Peter J. Fred and his wife Pamela founded the false memory syndrome in 1992 after Fred was accused of sexual abuse by his daughter. There you go. So the guy who adopted this false memory syndrome of abuse, his own daughter accused him of sexual abuse. And they developed this whole system of how it doesn't exist and you just make up stories in your own mind, and that's whose information we're supposed to take as, you know, valid. And that's what's in the DSF. Every time you just dig into any of these things, even the most littlest, it's astronomical how they've been able to do this.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing that there are people who would do this. Well, it's because these people are more monsters than people.
They are. They control the narrative. They control the narrative. What is that other one's name? Oh, that did that. This is another one that's absolutely horrific.
Looks rather suspicious.
The one who changed oh, somebody help me. The one who changed the laws on sexual abuse. He came out in the 60s, ran a bunch of human sexuality programs, and then the government paid for him to go around and have the court. They actually changed how long you had to spend in jail for like rapes and things like that. What is his name? Why can't I think of it right now? This is another one you look into. Part of what he did is he paid. Well, they claim he didn't pay them; that they just sent it in willingly. But there's some evidence that he was paying these people 200 pedophiles to abuse children with stopwatches. Okay. And the documentation that he wanted how many times these children would orgasm. There's one of them on this list, a 2-year-old girl, who they claim orgasmed 24 times in 24 hours. And their version of what an orgasm was kicking and screaming, crying, trying to get away. Oh, it's all in the documentation. And this is a guy the government paid to go around and teach people about human sexual behavior. Kinsey report. And there's been quite a few. There was a woman who did a lot of good research on this Alfred Kinsey, and I think she ended up dead, where she went through these actual documents of what they paid for. It is absolutely horrific. Absolutely horrific. And there's videos out there today about, psychological impacts, and they'll just happily mention, well, in the Kinsey report, it explains that human sexuality is very, out there and things like that. Like they talk about this guy like he was some kind of genius. It's so sickening. It's absolutely sickening. Let me see if I can find. Let me see if I can find that woman who did all that research on Kinsey, because this is really like massive. To watch this and to understand how the government paid for this person to have the laws changed on rape, so that in sexual predators that they'd only get a couple years, where before they were getting death sentences or life sentences, and how it changed only a couple years because of this Kinsey report. And you find out what he was actually involved in. It's insane. It's insane. And the government paid for that to happen. Like, you can see how they've been absolutely, Alfred Kinsey, the father of the sexual revolution. He's regarded as, such a amazing guy. Yeah. Let me see. I'm trying to find this one woman because she did amazing. She ended up sexual sabotage. It might be this Judith Wiseman. If you just pop Alfred Kinsey into YouTube, there's quite a few by this Judith Wiseman. But I'm trying to find, there was one I watched specifically where she went over these reports and and he said they just sent them in. There's a whole college that's been set up around this guy, and they say that these pedophiles just sent in their reports to tell, but there's evidence that he actually went around looking for pedophiles to provide this information, and that he very well may have been paying them to provide this information.
Okay. We might want to wrap things up since it's already past 11.
Yeah, it is. A little past 11. Thank you for coming on. Any final words before I get to the thank yous and ending the broadcast?
No, I just think people should look into the history of how we got to where we got and some of the major names in these different systems of control and how these things went down. Kinsey was actually good friends with Hugh Hefner as well as Aleister Crowley, and they all ran in the same circles. And if you start looking into these things, you might be pretty amazed by what you find.
Alrighty.
That's all.
Okay.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. It was very informative and a lot of information, and I hope people take interest who listen even after this stream is over. They take interest and look up the information for themselves. Yeah, so thank you to Ashley, thank you to Zachary, thank you to Vicky, El Peso, YouTubing Jaguar, Nate the Voluntarist, Cody Foray, Beast B Kezba, Patrick Smith, Stesic the Fox, Attack Helicopter Cat was in here earlier. Sorry about that. I got a bit of a bad cough, so that's why I was like muting and unmuting most of the time. All right. And thank you for tuning in, everyone. I'll see if I can get another stream started soon. Good night, everyone.
And don't be insane.
Yeah, definitely don't be insane.